So the Predacons, you know the story. Descendants of the Decepticons took their name from the faction that combined to form Predaking, probably because of their penchant for beast modes. And yeah, Megatron has all the beast modes. Animals, mythical creatures, whatever the Fusors are meant to be, even plants and fungi.
Apparently.
Although it's not exactly clear what prompted this shift in their paradigm, like away from vehicles and towards beast modes, it no doubt in part was down to this guy, the very first Predacon, who we'll talk about later. So loads to cover. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff, and let's kick off the most powerful list with Megatron. Originating in the Japanese Beast Wars Neo, the first thing that will strike you about Megatron is his ability to separate into 3 separate beast modes, called Skysaurus, a Pteranodon basically, Seasaurus, a Plesiosaur basically, and Landsaurus, a purple T-Rex that doesn't remind me of anyone at all. Thing is though, these 3 forms can meld into one terrifying beast called Magmasaurus. So he's actually got 4 beast modes. Now I can find a lot of imagery for that, like the 3 beast modes in their combined form. Hopefully it doesn't look anything like this toy. I mean, look at this thing, it's just bizarre. Like if I was that T-Rex, I would not be happy right now. Well, like where's the Plesiosaur's tail? He can do this because he has what's called a mitotic spark. Kind of like the one RC had in Revenge of the Fallen that allowed one mind to control 3 bodies. As I've said in my videos before, I'd love to talk more about the Japanese continuities, but I'm just not familiar enough with them. So, fuck it, basically. But I can talk about IDW's 2006 Beast Wars continuity, where he coordinated with Ravage to execute a plan to travel back in time to prehistoric Earth and reprogram all of the remaining protoforms and turn them into Predacon warriors. That done, he set about hunting down all of the Maximals. He beat Grimlock in combat. It was closer than you might think, but he used his separated beast modes to its full advantage to outmaneuver Big Grimmy. He fell into a time warp limbo after this whole thing with a chronal phase facilitator, which is this thing that temporarily puts someone outside of the flow of time, and as such was able to travel through history and see everything that's come before, but without actually being able to change anything. But he witnessed a grisly end for Cybertron at the hands of Unicron in the future. He managed to get a message through to Leo Convoy to warn him about what was about to happen and urged the other Predacons to make a truce with the Maximals. Let's take a minute to talk about Predatron, who featured in the Beast Wars Uprising continuity, which as I understand it, was a bunch of tech stories set in an alternate reality, and gave us a kind of reimagining of the Beast Wars origin story. As I said, tech story, so I just had to use this graphics right here. Now the most interesting thing about Predatron was that he was the very first Predacon. He happened to have a sister called Maxima, who, as I'm sure you can deduce, was the very first Maximal. And although circumstances would later put he and Maxima on opposing sides of ideology, Predatron actually had a great respect for the Maximals. And when she somehow died, not exactly sure how she died, but she died, Predatron wrote the famous Predacon Manifesto, setting out all the pillars for protoforms to lead a good life. Now I won't go through all of the pillars right Now I won't go through every single one of the pillars right here, but just to give you a sense, you know how when like Dinobot was a Predacon, he had this deep sense of honor and justice? Well, he's probably a really good example of what Predatron wanted the Predacon faction to be. Now, probably because his sister was a Maximal, Predatron had a really deep respect for the Maximals. His respect of Maximals even led him to ally with Cheetor after the Tripredacus Council threw him in jail for not joining them. He adopted a fearsome Jurassinoid alt mode, which if you want to get fancy is known as a mechanimal form. Mech, animal, mech, it's basically a robot T-Rex. It's a robot T-Rex, okay? And he adopted this fearsome alt mode as the Tripredacus Council started to gain prominence and began to distort his vision for the Predacons, and started to turn it into something a hell of a lot more sinister than what he actually intended. Predatron was an interesting character, I have to say. I would have loved to have seen more of him. But unfortunately, he was killed. He was beaten to death by the Predacon combiner known as Tripredacus, and there'll be more on him later in the video. Okay, time to talk about Rampage, a cannibalistic monster hell-bent on consuming the sparks of other bots. Sounds like a nice guy. So, when the Maximals started experimenting trying to recreate Starscream's spark, mainly because it was immortal and I guess that's why he's so often seen as a ghost, they could never have foreseen the monstrosity that they would create.
Is that fear you're feeling, Maximal? Yes. My spark It feeds on terror. Let it grow. Let it consume your circuitry. Feel it. Yes, feel it. Feel the fear.
Highly intelligent, cunning, and yes, with an immortal spark. When he escaped the facility, he was created and killed all of the colony's inhabitants, save for one security officer called Depth Charge, who I talk about in my Most Powerful Maximals vid. Depth Charge developed an obsession with Protoform X and eventually captured him, hauling him back to Cybertron to face justice. High Command didn't want to execute Protoform X though, instead ordering him to be put into stasis and loading him onto the science vessel Axelon to maroon on an uninhabited space rock somewhere. But of course, as we know, the Axelon was diverted from its mission to deal with the Predacon theft of the gold disc, resulting in the Axelon ejecting its cargo of protoforms, including Protoform X. His pod fell to Earth and he was awoken by a battle that happened to take place very close to his pod. He took this giant crab as a beast form and battle tank as vehicle mode, and upon his first encounter with the warring factions, he seemed pretty much unstoppable, ripping poor Tarantulas limb from limb, and he was only stopped when a rocket jammed in his tank tracks. Megatron managed to subjugate Protoform X by cutting out part of his spark and manipulating it with Energon so that it caused him intense pain. Megatron christened him Rampage and welcomed him to the Predacons, where he would show off his firepower when Megatron ordered him to destroy this mountain, but would also display a kinder side when he discovered Transmutate and tried to bring her into the Predacon fold, even after Megatron ordered her to be destroyed. He survived a barrage of missiles fired at him by Ravage, then coldly drove over his fellow Predacon Quickstrike just to get to his target, before another missile blasted him right in the face. He was fine. He was finally killed in a battle on the ocean floor when Depth Charge shoved an Energon shard into his so-called immortal spark and blew the two of them to high heaven. His story is expanded upon in IDW's Beast Wars Uprising when a scientist called Deluge started a program examining the very rare 1%ers, bots with very powerful sparks that could potentially help in the fight against Unicron. I'll do a video on the 1%ers at one point, just not sure when. Now, we've seen that usually 1%ers are born, no one knows how or why, but Deluge started trying to make them. And even after popular opinion turned against him, he carried on his research by himself, eventually creating Protoform X. He quickly realized that it was an angry and violent being, and after Deluge tried to lock him away, Protoform X burst free and carved his way through many innocent Cybertronians, which earned him the name Rampage. He was overpowered by Depth Charge and put on a prison ship and blasted out of the airlock onto a planet called LGC-088, where lo and behold, he came across Transmutate, who turned out to be a fellow 1%er, also created by Deluge. His story in this continuity ended when he found his creator Deluge, and the two had a conversation about the reasons behind his creation. It turned out that Rampage had poisoned both of their drinks with cyber venom, in not only a bid for revenge, but a suicide, and long and painful death. But as they spoke, Rampage decided to spare his creator the suffering, and blew him to pieces instead. An act of mercy there, kind of. Alright, next, I've put Shockarakt. And unfortunately, he's never been seen in screen media, at least not as far as I'm aware. But this guy has a pretty interesting story behind him. At first, he was kind of like a mid-level soldier, round about the level of Pterosaur or Scorponok or one of those guys, until he fell into a cave one day and discovered the dark essence of Unicron himself, and used it to make the Matrix of Conquest, and set about becoming ruler about absolutely everything actually. He used it to enslave a large swathe of the galaxy, including Cybertron. He exterminated many a resisting foe with his heralds, Antagony and Cataclysm. Cool names. I mean, if you've got like Horsemen of the Apocalypse, you want them to have cool names, right? You can't have like Steve, Joe, Dave, and Bob. Later, when various Maximals began showing up from various timelines and differing universes to try and stop him, he was powerful enough to pretty much just vaporize them. And he was only beaten when a band of warriors converted themselves into raw energy and entered the Matrix of Conquest, and therefore go back in time and cut him off from the dark energy in the past, which caused him to cease existing in the present, or at least basically go back to being the middling grunt he was before. He still fell into that fateful cave, but found nothing in it, but a cold voice whispering on the wind, "So close." Similarly, in the 2006 IDW continuity, he was inhabited by Anglemoy energy and created the Matrix of Chaos this time, which was one that was fed by dark energies and negative feelings, and with it, gave himself a new body, one that was able to teleport between planets and control the weather. He sent out his minions to gather all of the Anglemoy energy they could find, in order for him to attain god-level powers. But in doing so, he gained the attention of Unicron, who was drawn towards Cybertron. Shockarakt was easily powerful enough to defeat almost any opponent at this stage, but as he realized that he was being used by Unicron and that Cybertron would be devoured, he ripped the Matrix of Chaos from his chest, killing himself and allowing Megatron out of the time loop he was stuck in to go and make that truce with the Maximals and fight the Dark God Unicron. Let's give a shout out to Waspinator for somehow being able to endure all those beatings and thrashings, having all of his limbs ripped off and even squished into a cube and flicked off of a fucking spatula at one point. He must have some kind of regen ability that's verging on immortality. It's like Wolverine or Hulk levels of indestructibility. And on top of all of that, he became the ruler of early human civilization at the end of it all.
Waspinator happy at last.
Good for you, my simple friend. And top of the list,
Yes.
is Megatron. I really tried to find a Predacon more powerful than Megatron, but I just couldn't. There was no doing it. So on one hand, an over-dramatic Bond villain in a purple T-Rex suit. On the other hand, a villain that's perhaps second only to Shockwave in his preparedness to destroy the entire multiverse for the sake of his schemes. And if it wasn't for the Maximals, if it wasn't for Optimus Primal, he probably would have succeeded. He's had several alt modes over the course of his existence, including the purple T-Rex, then the purple T-Rex on roller skates with jet engines bolted to the sides, then a motherfucking red dragon. He is rarely beaten in combat, with enough firepower to level a city block, including this awesome laser that fires out of the T-Rex mouth. Atomic breath. So boiling it down, firstly, he tried to alter time. Yep, he did that so that the Decepticons would win the first Cybertronian war. That's right, he started out as a bot called Galavar. Kind of this petty thug, criminal, kind of petty, pretty petty. And he found out that G1 Megatron left a message on this golden disc. Telling anyone who found it how to go back in time, the location of Earth, and how to change the timeline. So that's exactly what he did. And while he was there, he tried to murder all of humanity. Yeah, I mean, maybe I should say that with a little more gravitas, because it's kind of serious.
All of humanity.
No, more gravitas.
All of humanity.
More.
All of humanity.
More gravitas! Alright, back in the room. So after the Beast Wars ended, after the 3 seasons, they shipped him back to Cybertron. But somehow he managed to get there before the Maximals and take the whole place over. He unleashed an immobilizing virus, which must be absolute torture when transforming is like that central to your existence. Kind of like telling a pogo stick, you can't pogo. No, I want a pogo! And unleashing an army of Vehicons on the poor Cybertronian population. He was a disciple of Onyx Prime in the 2005 IDW continuity, but of course, Onyx Prime turned out to be Shockwave in disguise, so that kind of pissed him off.
Don't piss me off.
So he allied himself with Unicron to destroy the entire galaxy. I guess if you found out that everything you believed in was a lie, you might align yourself with a giant planet killer robot. You can see how that would happen. Like this morning, I was in the supermarket behind this old lady with her groceries. She's taking ages. I was like, oh, I'm going to align myself with a giant planet killing robot. So right there, we've got Alter the Timeline for his own personal agenda. Oh wait, that's not a laughing matter. Wipe out all of these monkey people who turn out to be us. Also, no laughing matter. And ally himself with the most fearsome living weapon of mass destruction ever created. So yes, Megatron gets the crown in terms of deeds, in terms of influence, in terms of
I'm too sexy for my show.
in terms of just outright maniacal supervillainy.
However,
There might be a few
that are even stronger.
in terms of just raw, brute physical strength. Now I've got kind of a curveball. Well, not a curveball necessarily, but an unusual one, let's just say. And that's Predacons, the combiner made up of C-Clamp, Ramhorn, Predacon, Ravage, and Tarantulas to make up a beast that was strong enough to kill Predaking and usher in the era of the beasts and the Predacons Council. Not much else is known about him, but considering how powerful this guy is, his power should not be doubted. I'm a little confused though, because he's definitely written up as a Predacon, and all of the bots who form him up are definitely beasts, but this guy is clearly made up of vehicles. Another combiner now, let's talk about Predacons, a threat so large that the Maximals created Magnaboss in response. He was made up of the 3 members of the Predacons Council, Ramhorn, Predacon, and C-Clamp. The only way I can think to describe this is abomination. I mean, look at him, fish everywhere, wings at the back that I guess gives him flight capability, huge blade over here. Ugh. Anyway, this guy is a night hunter, burrowing underground and emerging from beneath his enemies in the quietest part of night to inflict maximum casualties on his unsuspecting victims. As I mentioned earlier, he tracked down Megatron, the very first Predacon, in the hope of converting him to rally behind the Predacons Council. Probably because he knew how influential Megatron was. But when Megatron refused, Predacons beat him to death.
Oh no.
But as we're talking about just pure brutal strength and raw power, I reckon the aligned continuity Predaking takes the top spot. The one we saw in the show was actually a clone created by Shockwave, so I don't know if that means he would be more powerful due to Shockwave's genetic tinkering or not. But I've spoken of his deeds in previous videos, but just briefly, they include taking out 2 of the Wrecker's finest in Wheeljack and Ultra Magnus, holding back a literal army of the dead, and managing to not get completely obliterated by the Unicron-inhabited form of Megatron, or Galvatron as a lot of people like to call him. I mean, he was still convincingly beaten, but this guy pretty much dusted everybody else, and Predaking at least survived. But considering that Beast Megatron would be quite a bit smaller than G1 Megatron, and Predaking is quite a bit larger than Prime's Megatron, just on size alone, Predaking beats Megatron. I don't think there's any question about that. Although in War for Cybertron, Beast Megatron was kind of round about the same size as G1 Megatron if I remember correctly. But I don't think it would make much difference. I think Predaking is just so powerful. Alright, you guys, let's leave that there for now. Make sure you let me know if I've forgotten any. I'm about halfway with my bots with superpowers video. Sunder's in that one, Tarn's in that one. In fact, you would not believe how many bots have these kind of special abilities. It's going to be a long one, I think. So make sure you're subscribed for that, and I will see you then. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for all your support of the channel, including my Buy Me a Coffee page, and I'll see you very soon for the next one. Thank you very much for watching, and cheerio, bye!